Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war live stream news update. We're going to be talking about military aid. We're going to be talking about geopolitical shenanigans and what's going on around the world concerning the war in Ukraine. This is a late night one for me, as in it's 10:30 UK time. I am pretty tired. I hope I will be able to remain cogent and make sense to you. It's been a long day. I've been out and about today, and that's why I've been not churning out my usual amount of content. So here it is, all in one. If I didn't do this tonight, I'd have such a backlog tomorrow, and I've got the sort of brain where I have to get it out there. If I've taken down the nuggets, I need to then regurgitate those nuggets to you guys, and so it has to happen. So it's got to happen now. I got back home and I finished watching The Hostage on Netflix, which is a Saran Jones series with my missus, and then she's like, "Oh man, I'm knackered. I've got to go to bed." I was like, "Oh, 9:30. That's pretty early. I'll be kicking out a video then," because that's how I roll. Okay, so we are going to start with the military aid. What's been going on vis-a-vis the aid going to Ukraine from all these different directions, and then we're going to get on to geopolitical stuff. But I'm going to actually start with a couple of slightly off-the-wall things. Caught a live one, says Chris R. And to be honest, like, I do occasionally think about trying to do my lives at a different time. So part of why I'm doing this live now is because I don't usually do it at this time so late. I've done previously, but not normally. And actually that allows people from Australia to maybe turn up. West Coast of America can take part. So sometimes it's good to mix up the timing. Right. So, well, funny you should say this, Rob. JP, I thought you did Trump on us and disappeared. Funny you should say this, because that's where we're going to start. So I did a video this morning. My first video this morning was a half-an-hour one on Trump's ailments and this kind of not quite a conspiracy theory, because I think there's enough evidence now to suggest Trump has almost certainly got some kind of issue. So he's been absent for a week. He's not been in front of the cameras for a week. He's not spoken in public for a week. There have been these Truth Social posts that appear to be coming from someone that isn't him. The style is different, and he ends it President DJT, which he doesn't normally do. And then his family haven't tweeted anything for a couple of days. We have had a road to one of the hospitals blocked off until Thursday. That's in Virginia, and he's been down in Virginia. We've also had Melania Trump turning up supposedly at at another medical center. The Thingy Reed Medical Center. Sorry, my brain is tired. So you've got all these other things, and of course his hands, his ankles, cankles, the CVI claims of his cardiovascular stuff that the White House had finally admitted to, and then it's looking at the drugs that he's now on that have been released to the public, and you piece all these things together, and it's all rather weird. Going to play golf, or at least getting in the vehicles, supposedly going to Virginia to play golf. But no one's allowed to go and see them. The press doesn't get near him. They take pictures from afar, and his face looks really swollen. And then some further weird things, like providing right-wing influencers with videos and pictures supposedly of him playing golf to prove that he's A-OK. But those pictures and videos appear to come from at least a week ago, and sometimes a month ago, where in fact sometimes in June, I think, some of that video footage. So they are lying. They are definitely lying, because the White House is providing this supposed proof of life imagery. I mean, he is alive, but this idea that they're providing this video footage to say, look, he's fine, he's playing golf, and that video footage is definitely from previously. So they are putting the wool over people's eyes. And then I was just watching this just literally 5 minutes ago, and this guy's like, it's Labor Day. I'm around the White House, and it's like, I can't get to the They've closed all of the roads down surrounding the White House for like 2 blocks back from the White House. And I've never seen this, particularly on Labor Day before. This is really weird. So you start piecing all this stuff together. You think something weird is going on. and it's now beyond a conspiracy theory because he's not been really in public for the best part of 8 days, is it now? And there is something strange going on, and I'm wondering whether foreign dignitaries might know this. You got the SCO meeting, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting in China at the moment, and you're wondering whether their intelligence agencies are talking about this and whether their leaders are discussing this. So I thought that was something interesting to start off with. And then I was going to show you this. This is our friend Evil Girkin. So Evil Girkin, or Igor Girkin, Igor Strelkov, the guy that was involved with the Little Green Men invasion into Ukraine, Crimea, and Donbass in 2014. He's now in prison because he is so ultra nationalist. It's not that he's against the war; he's so for the war that he can't believe how crapply the Russian administration is prosecuting the war, and so he started criticizing, Grandpa, as in Putin, and got himself put in jail. And now he said this, and I think this is worth taking note of. It's a disgrace. We didn't break through a single section of the front over the summer. In 16 months, we completed the assault in Chasiv Yar, and at the same time, Ukraine allowed young people to travel abroad, which they've just done. If Ukraine were on its last legs, they would have already started conscripting 16-year-olds, but they are doing well. That's a fairly salient point there. But I think he's right in that the Russians have not succeeded. They've been defeated in Sumy. They've now there are worries, so they've moved their troops from Sumy. They've admitted kind of defeat, if you like, implicitly in Sumy by taking their troops from Sumy, and they've put them into the Pokrovsk region because the Ukrainians are breaking through in Myrna, in the Pokrovsk area, and have had some success in countering that deep reconnaissance group push, and are then doing their own kind of counter. So the Russians are piling in troops there. So, okay, something might come of that. But again, it's reacting to, I talked about there being a change of momentum, a change of initiative. The Russians are having to now react to what the Ukrainians are doing. And I think that's really significant. There's not been a huge push in Zaporizhia, even though people have long claimed that there will be, that the Russians are amassing troops. There are different areas of the front, and we've seen this before on the front line in Ukraine, where Ukrainian generals, commanders in certain areas say, hey, the Russians are amassing troops here, they're going to be attacking. And you wonder if they are doing this so that the general staff give them reinforcements and extra equipment and whatnot. Because we are hearing from different people that the Russians are amassing troops to attack in Zaporizhia. We're hearing that they're amassing troops to attack in Pokrovsk. Now we're hearing that they are amassing to attack in Siversk, which is just below the Serebyansky forest, and all the other places as well. So, there are claims that the Russians are getting ready to do these big moves. But then also, I think Girkin is right here that the Russians have not achieved anything significant at all. And in fact, they didn't when they attacked last year in Kharkiv. And they really failed to make the inroads there because the Ukrainians reacted and stopped that. There was all that panic in Kharkiv, if you remember, the same kind of panic in Sumy, same kind of panic around Pokrovsk. Panic happens and the Ukrainians react, and they seem to do a good job of whacking those moles, so to speak. Right, let's go on to where I was actually going to start. That's my precursor. That's the prologue to this novel of information. So the European Commission is expected to present a range of options in 2 months, supported by a legal assessment. What for? Well, they are preparing proposals for the use of 210 billion euros in frozen Russian assets. It might be some kind of hybrid thing. I've seen something where it's mentioned they would put some of it towards, giving it straight to the Ukrainians and then keeping some of it back, and so on and so forth. In addition to the full confiscation, though, it says here, and the use of excess profits in the current format, mechanisms are being discussed that would allow the assets to generate more income. So there is a bonus for Ukraine not being given the full amount now, because it is sustainable. It is sustained income, because you're just creaming off the profits and giving the profits to Ukraine. Whereas if you gave everything to Ukraine now, it'll be used and then that's it. It's all gone. So there are pros and cons to both these ways of doing it. Mechanisms are being discussed that would allow the assets to generate more income. The European Commission is expected to present a range of options in 2 months, supported by a legal assessment. One of the options involves placing assets through a special purpose vehicle, SPV, managed from Brussels, a new fund that will be supported by several EU and non-EU countries. This will allow for riskier investments that could generate higher returns for Ukraine. Moving assets to a structure that could potentially operate without the unanimity rule would deprive Hungary of the opportunity to return them to Russia. So the idea is that they also need to get around Hungary being a problem here and wanting to get these assets back to Russia. We're going to return to this idea of Hungary a little bit later, because it pops up in the geopolitical section, where the EU are trying to find ways around what Hungary are doing. Hungary is blocking, though, to continue with this idea, blocking the €6 billion allocation to Ukraine from the European Peace Facility, said Foreign Minister Peter Shahed. He stated that Budapest opposes financing the Ukrainian military because, of course, we have had Ursula von der Leyen in Bulgaria. We're going to return to this as well, because some are saying essentially that the Russians have tried to assassinate von der Leyen by stopping the GPS, jamming the GPS to her flight. Her flight had to land using paper maps. Some people are saying this is really concerning. It's genuinely an attempt to bring down her plane. That is an attempt on the leader of the EU. This is kind of war type thing, so there is that you can make a bellicose interpretation of what Russia have done. And I think that's absolutely justified, 100% justified. But anyway, she was in Bulgaria in Sopot at the VMS ammunition factory. Shells are produced here in large quantities, she says herself on her own Twitter handle, that not only for Europe's stockpile, but also Ukraine's defense. 1/3 of the weapons delivered to Ukraine at the start of the war came from Bulgaria. This is something we had heard previously, and now she's actually reiterating that in public. Thank you for your support to Ukraine's defense. It benefits Europe's security as a whole. And then there's also talk about Bulgaria still creating a lot of ammunition for Ukraine. Now, Zelensky announces faster air defense deliveries after deadly Russian strikes. We are accelerating the supply of additional air defense systems to enhance protection against missiles, said Zelensky. Now, he could be referring to Germany. So France and Germany have promised to give more air defense systems. A joint statement after the 25th Franco-German Council of Ministers in Toulon also pledged a broader connection between the two countries' security policy. So there's actually talk about nuclear umbrella, France playing a serious role on the nuclear side of things. We also hear, kind of in that context, that we've learned another IRIS-T SLM fire unit has been delivered 2 weeks ago, I think. This further strengthened the capabilities of Ukrainian armed forces. So they are continually getting those IRIS-T medium-range air defense systems out to Ukraine. And they've been very useful. In fact, they have been thought to have shot down a couple of ballistic missiles as well. They're not particularly designed to do that, but they have apparently successfully done so, which means that they are quite an interesting last line of defense, maybe type thing. Or you can place them around some fairly high value targets, and if they ever get ballistic missiles, you can hope maybe the SLM can do it without having to put a Patriot missile system there or something like that. So that's really good news. We have Zelensky here saying Ukraine's PURL weapons program. So that is actually the US weapons program that allows them to expedite weapons to Ukraine if NATO allies or European allies buy them on behalf of Ukraine. That has hit a major milestone as 7 NATO allies have committed $2 billion plus in August alone. You'll get some MAGA people singing the praises of this, which is Trump saying, hey, I'm not going to help you anymore by giving you any more American stuff. We've already given you $350 billion worth of kit, which is a complete lie. But they'll love the fact that other nations are being forced now to buy stuff off the US. So US is creaming in the money rather than having to give stuff themselves. But of course, it just goes to show that really Trump isn't one for alliances. President Zelensky announces an ambitious target of $1 billion monthly purchases from US defense systems, or of US defense systems, including Patriot missiles and HIMARS. I've seen HIMARS mentioned a number of times just in the last day, so it's clear that the Americans are providing HIMARS missiles. I'm sure they're selling those, not providing them in the sense of giving them, but they are certainly selling them. I think they're part of these packages. Ukraine's offensive capabilities look set to receive a significant boost in the coming months with the announcement of the US selling $850 million worth of extended range attack munitions and all the stuff that goes with them, the pylons, the training. I don't know how quickly the Ukrainians can get these on their planes and be trained to use them, because we hear that these 3,350 missiles are going to end up or they're at least going to start getting to Ukraine before the year's end. So that's good. But obviously that gives sort of all of September, October, November, December. So that's 4 months worth of waiting, and a lot can happen in that time. And then they've got to train on them and get all the logistics sorted. The other thing I was thinking is, that's a lot of money, and 3,350 sounds like a lot of missiles. It depends how much of a punch these pack, because something like for example, we have heard that the Russians this month have launched more guided glide bombs than they had in the last month, I think. So they've upped their usage, not as much as April, where they fired over 5,000 guided glide bombs. But last month, August, they dropped something like 4,380 guided glide bombs, and those are significant munitions. So you think 1 month, and the Russians, okay, they're bombs, but they are guided glide bombs. They're not missiles. They don't have the range. So these missiles can apparently go up to 400 and something kilometers. So these are different munitions. But what I'm trying to say is that arguably they might not last that long, 3,350, or they might, because actually they don't have enough planes. They won't have enough planes to release these in a way that the Russians are releasing their carbon FAB bombs. But yeah, I guess I'm sort of speculating a lot here, but yeah, I guess it also depends how good these missiles are. They've been specially designed for Ukraine. Okay, anyway, moving on. The US State Department has approved 2 separate arms deals, so part then again of this PURL system for Ukraine, one being worth $179.1 million and another $150 million. So it's about $330 million worth of kit. So the $179.1 million is for sustaining Patriot air defense systems. Sustaining them, I'm going to have a look at this, see if that's actually missiles. $150 million for expanding satellite communication services for Starlink terminals. So Elon Musk is going to do very well out of that. Thank you very much. So what do we have? The following non-MDE items will be included: classified and unclassified spare parts, maintenance support, classified and unclassified software updates, system modifications, associated modification kits, test equipment, communication equipment, associated accessories, integration services, repair and return, storage tooling, field surveillance program, international engineering service, blah, 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 logistics, blah, blah, technical documentation software, blah, 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 179.1 million. So that doesn't look like it is at all missiles. There are no interceptors there, no systems at all, which you wouldn't expect for that kind of money. That's $179.1 million for all this kind of stuff that goes around the sides. That's all very important. They need all that, otherwise, these systems stop functioning. But just to give you a sense of what that is. Then we have a new wave of humanitarian aid has arrived in Ukraine from Croatia. So $3 million worth of medical equipment, generators, transformers for hospitals and communities in war-affected regions. That's excellent stuff. Like lots of electricity, energy will find its way to places that otherwise wouldn't have done. And that's super important, especially with winter coming on. And then we have more generators here. So Kherson has received 3 powerful generators from US partners. 2 generators will provide heating for Kherson residents, while 1 ensures interrupted hospital operations. Combined value about $1 million there. So I was seeing a breakdown of all the stuff that's coming from the US. There is some private stuff that's being bought from the US just by the means. It isn't necessarily to do with military equipment. This could be this. So, I mean, it might have come from the US, but it probably won't have been given by the US unless it's been privately fundraised within the US. As in, I doubt it's coming from the US government, is what I'm trying to say. Now, this isn't anything to do with Ukraine yet, but Saab have introduced the first missile that can apparently defeat drone swarms by utilizing an airburst mode. So airburst is where, so with an artillery shell, you get an airburst that explodes above the ground, and it explodes into shrapnel, and so it gives it like a larger radius where it can just rain down shrapnel, and therefore, you know, if there are lots of men around there, then it can take them all out or damage lots of equipment, rather than not having airburst, and the shell would hit the ground, and then the ground would actually absorb much of the kinetic impact and explosives of the shell, and that's not great if you want to hit lots of things around there rather than make a big crater and destroy one thing a lot. So airbursts are useful like that, but you can obviously fire airbursts upwards in a way that will, this is a missile that will, I assume, explode out. And if there's a swarm of drones, it will just take out an absolute ton of drones at the same time. So this is, I assume, future-proofing in terms of defense against autonomous drone swarms, an actual swarm, which is generally understood in drone terms as a whole bunch of drones operating autonomously together as one, rather than if Ukraine send over, say, 300 drones tonight into generally a similar area, all being individually programmed or all being operated or whatever. Some people call that a swarm, but it's not really the proper usage of the term as commonly, as I think more technically understood. That's just a lot of drones. It's not really a swarm of drones, but you will hear that being mentioned. So a swarm of drones generally is to do with, you know, autonomous drone activity. So I guess everything's going to be right now about trying to work out, in terms of, you know, armed forces and innovation around the world, what is the threat, not right now, but in sort of 2-3 years' time, and can we second guess what it's going to be so that we're ahead of the curve? In this case, Saab is saying, right, although we don't have drone swarms yet on the front line, like I was just describing, that is the next step. People are working on it, so we need to have the defense against that. There's no point waiting until these things are utilized on a battlefield and go, oh, now we need something to defend that. You need to be ahead of the game. Sorry, just dying a little bit off mic there. Okay, now on to Ukrainian stuff here. So Denmark plans to contribute around 1.4 billion euros in 2025 toward weapons production by Ukrainian defense companies. According to their defense minister, Poulsen, 600 million euros in contracts are already placed last year, says Max 25. Now, because I don't know what the source is here, and this is just Max 25, and English isn't first language, and blah blah blah. What I'd like to know is, you know, $600 million in contracts are already, you know, has already been placed last year. Does that mean like calendar year 2024? Is that within the 1.4 billion? Is that in 2025? Is that up to, you know, I don't know. So is that another 1.4 billion for the next 4 months of 2025? I don't know. Or does it include stuff that's already been given to Ukraine? But nonetheless, the point is, the broader point is that Denmark are cool. Awesome. Thank you, Danish people. As Alan is asking here, do you know what happened to the British laser drone defense system? So this is a Dragonfire system, which is also the name of the thermite dropping drones. But the laser, I'm not 100% sure. I believe it did get to Ukraine. Apparently Ukrainians have used a laser system successfully, and that was according to someone like Potenchuk, Malyuk, someone, I don't know, someone was saying it might have even been Sursky, but they might have been developing their own using the British one, maybe. We also know that the US have been developing that, the South Koreans have been developing it, and we've also heard the Russians have shot down a drone using their own laser system. So I don't know what has happened to the British one, but I understand they're trying to fit it to our naval vessels. But whether the Ukrainians, I think the British are pretty good at the moment of being quite generous with a lot of our technology to help the Ukrainians. So I would imagine it probably ended up out there, but these things are quite prototypey. So if I was a British, I'd be making that, sending it to Ukraine to get them to use it to work out why it's not quite good enough yet, because undoubtedly it would need improving. And there's no better test ground than the Ukrainian battlefields, which is why Ukraine have brought out this project called Test in Ukraine, where they're offering to all allies to test their weapons in Ukraine. Yeah, we'll test them. You can come and test them over here, and you'll get the best feedback that you can possibly ask for, rather than firing these things into a desert at a dummy or whatever. Right. Polish military industrial complex company WB Group has launched the production of drones in Ukraine, according to press service. Company produces reconnaissance drones called the Fly Eye. So they are producing those apparently in Ukraine. So that's a Polish company. Then we hear that France and Ukraine are coordinating the launch of drone production for the Ukrainian armed forces, according to French ambassador Gaël Vessière. Talks are ongoing with a French company, probably Renault, the French car company, to establish drone manufacturing within Ukraine. That is an ongoing situation. And then we hear that German firm has been secretly producing drones in Ukraine, according to Politico. Although this is the synopsis by Next, the German design company Quantum Systems is ramping up drone production, and I have kind of mentioned this before, at secret sites across Ukraine, according to Politico, noting that quite other drone manufacturers hope to follow the model of this model of cooperation. All the development of the drone industry is happening in Donbass, not in Silicon Valley, said Matthias Elena, Quantum's director of business and development and government relations. Quantum's Vector reconnaissance drones were among the first delivered to Ukraine as humanitarian aid after the start of the war in 2022. So these were reconnaissance, seen as humanitarian aid. Now, I reported the other day that there was a video, in fact, German Aid to Ukraine was interested particularly in this, of them using vector drones, some unit, putting them together and whatnot. Over the next 3 years, Quantum Systems set up facilities in Ukraine, believing that a presence in a war-torn country is vital for any military drone producer. I agree with this. Quote, while others are only starting to talk about joint ventures and possibilities of producing here and there, we've been doing it for many years, said Alexander Berezhny, managing director of Quantum Systems Ukraine. So, wow, they've been creating these reconnaissance drones, these vector drones, for several years now, and have production across Ukraine, according to them. So that's pretty significant. Okay, we're going to go on to security guarantees. Sorry, not that you really need to know this, but I reckon I've had COVID for about 7 weeks. My partner's daughter still can't taste or smell anything, and yeah, just it's lingered. Yeah. Anyway, whatever. Thank you very much to Michael Vuja for gifting 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Awesome source. And thank you to Kevin Force for doing likewise. Really generous. You two are stalwart supporters of the channel. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, right. Also worth reminding you guys that we are running a Car for Ukraine fundraiser, and it is called the Autumn Harvest. We're part ATP Geopolitics. You guys, we as a team, we're part of the Autumn Harvest Trucks 2025. We're up to almost 1,000. I haven't really talked about it too much, so that's amazing. Much of that came from when I was talking with Jake Bro the other day. Go and watch that if you haven't already. It was a good little chat we had. So please don't go to atpgeo.com/donate. Because I'm struggling to get hold of Benny at the moment to change the link over. So that my atpgeo.com/donate link will go to the old campaign for Jiggers Paul, which, feel free to donate to them as well. But for this one, I've got the link separately in the description below. So please help out with that one if you are at all willing and able. Yeah, so security guarantees, let's go on to that. So interesting. Somebody says the Dragonfire system is costing 120 million per warship. Now, I don't know, of course, Nigel, thank you, Nigel Goodinson, but that's not fact checked at all. So, assuming that Nigel is correct here, we hear that the Dragonfire system was costing 10 pence per shot. So, it's incredibly cheap to use, but it might be very expensive to make and then to put on a ship. Because you don't want to be firing lasers into the bridge or the superstructure or whatever. So yeah, I don't know how that number's made up and whether it takes into account all the R&D as well over the course of however many years they've been working on that. So I assume that anything like that will be pretty expensive to make, but it's incredibly cheap to use, which is absolutely brilliant. Right. Okay. Germany, according to here, the Bild, abandons plans to send troops to Ukraine, opting instead for financial support, military training, and arms production. Berlin aims to deter future Russian aggression without deploying the Bundeswehr, following Trump's refusal to commit and fading hopes of peace talks. I don't know. This is all up. And by the way, you know, anything that's claimed here, take it with a pinch of salt because it changes so often with these security guarantee situations. We'll send troops. No, we won't send troops. We'll send troops. We'll keep them here. We won't allow them to do this. And then it's dependent on the US. And then Trump says this, Trump says that. And then it turns out Trump's had a stroke and he's disappeared or whatever. So we might surmise. Ireland is ready to contribute to providing security guarantees for Ukraine. Zelensky said following his conversation with the Irish Prime Minister Martin. Wow, so that's cool. In fact, here's the thing. If you guys have Netflix, quite a nice little film to go and watch is a film called The Siege of Shahed, which is a story of the Irish UN peacekeepers who, just a handful of them essentially, fought off like 1,000 mercenaries and locals in the 1960s, I think it was, in, I don't know, Congo. No, I don't think it was, somewhere, one of the Central African nations, I believe. And stars Jamie Dornan and is a good film. So it's on Netflix called The Siege of Shahed. And it's this kind of, these guys were, because in the end, spoiler, close your ears if you're going to watch it. They do this amazing job. And in the end, they surrender, having hardly lost anyone. But because they surrendered, they were deemed as, even though what they did was insanely impressive, they were deemed as like a letdown and weren't celebrated. And so these people were kind of forgotten by history as being an embarrassment because they surrendered to these hordes of mercenaries and whatnot. And actually, they did a phenomenal job. And it was something like in 2009, they were formally recognized by the Irish government or whatever year it was. And rightly so, because they did a freaking amazing job. And it's just one of those quirks of history where at the time it was seen as a bit of an embarrassment that the UN didn't prevail there, even though they couldn't have prevailed and they weren't given the support they were needed, etc., etc. So there you go. Go and watch it. It's a good film. Okay, ATPGEO, says BME, the £120 million cost of the Dragonfire comes from the UK Defense Journal for Dragonfire. So thank you very much. That's awesome. Right. Let's move on. Now we've had the sidebar, the Netflix sidebar. There's a few war films you can watch that are pretty good on Netflix. Another one called 1971, which is the story of the troubles in Northern Ireland. This guy that gets split up and gets on the wrong side of the troubles, a soldier, and he has to go sort of underground for like a couple of days or whatever. So that's an interesting film as well. And I watched a film the other day with the main guy, and that was in it. I was like, I recognize him, and he's from there. And then there's another one that's worth watching called 6 Days. That's I think got Jamie Bell in. That is about the Iranian embassy back in 1980s, the early 80s. And that's really good as well. So those are all on Netflix. You can go and watch them if you want to watch war films, or you can just watch ATP Geopolitics. Ireland ready to contribute to providing security guarantees. So good stuff there. According to the Daily Telegraph, Donald Trump is discussing with Europeans the use of, I don't think he is at the moment, the use of PMCs, private military companies, so effectively sort of mercenary outfits, in Ukraine as part of a long-term peace plan. Of course, the Americans are quite well versed in using these. In fact, if you want, what's it? Another war film you can watch. It's not on any streaming device at the moment because I was going to show this to one of my sons. It's called 13 Hours. It's a Benghazi. The film. It's a couple of films called 13 Hours. It's 13 Hours Benghazi something or other. It's a really interesting film about the Benghazi situation where they're having to hold out. Anyway, that's not using private military companies. Actually, is it? No, that's actually the genuine American military. But plenty of films you see using PMCs. The Americans, you get a lot of veterans that leave the armed forces and then go back to Iraq or wherever and work for these as contractors. In fact, you had someone recently that was whistleblowing in Israel. So an American guy that was working for they call them contractors, but basically PMCs, working for a security contractor in the Gaza Strip or around there. And he then had to come back and he whistleblew about how horrific it was and all these war crimes. And it's fascinating listening to him. But they're very active. So PMC fighters would build fortifications, bases, and protect US financial interests. And any Russian attack on them would be regarded as an attack on the United States. What's interesting there is, like, I guess the theory here from an American point of view is we're not sending our boys. Like, you're not forcing Americans to go to make Ukraine secure. You are paying. So that would cost, in terms of the cost of an American military project to do that. And then if there are deaths, then you've got compensation. If you've got injuries, then you've got rehabilitation compensation. Whereas if you send PMCs, I guess it might be quite expensive up front to do that, but there's probably less of an issue if people get killed or injured. It's just like that. It was their choice. They willingly wanted to go and do this because they're getting paid to do it, rather than being members of the armed forces and doing it. Yes, they're getting paid, but they're getting ordered to do it. And so therefore it becomes a bit of a problem if they're coming back in body bags, whereas PMC American private contractors are probably not treated the same in that respect. So that's quite an interesting move from Trump to talk about that. And it makes a bit of sense to me from a kind of Trumpian political point of view. So, okay. Yeah, I think Ukraine would have had enough of PMCs on their land. Yeah, there you go. Then, of course, you've got this, right? Okay, Blackwater, the head of the PMC, is a brother of a Trump cabinet member, Betsy DeVos. Yes, of course, I forgot that. I often forget that as well, Blackwater's connection to Betsy DeVos. Betsy DeVos, she's not cabinet member anymore. She used to be in Trump 1.0, the cabinet member for education. Horrific as that. I don't know that she's a cabinet member anymore, but I might stand corrected on that one. But yeah, Blackwater are fairly controversial, as Kevin Ford says. They had a terrible track record in Iraq. Look it up. Too much to list, but murder of civilians, yeah, absolutely. But you get the, in principle, you can understand why Trump would want to do that. It might be a grift, there might be money changing hands and blah blah blah. But from a kind of PR point of view, and his MAGA support, I think they'd be much more in favour of that than sending our boys to Ukraine, if you see what I mean. Right, EU countries have agreed to deploy military instructors inside Ukraine. EU Policy Chief Kaja Kallas has announced. She said there is broad support for expanding the EUMAM mission to provide training and advisory assistance in Ukraine once the ceasefire is in place. This is the sort of thing you're going to see a lot of, and it's what the British have talked about. Like, okay, we're not going to be frontline troops. We're going to be back training and doing this kind of stuff further back from the front line. So, yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Diplomats, says Kyiv Independent, officials and experts who spoke to the Kyiv Independent say there's little chance Russia will ever agree to robust security guarantees, and Ukraine's Western allies lack the political and military resolve necessary to enforce them. Yeah, okay, that's a pretty valid point. And Russia have been saying we deserve a veto in the security guarantees. And then people have been saying, well, that's ridiculous. You can't get to dictate what the security guarantees are from allied nations. And then the US recently just came out and said, yeah, well, of course it's right that this has to be done in agreement with the Russians. And that kind of position really annoys me. And I think it was Marco Rubio saying it. It's like, no, why does everything have to be with the agreement of the Russians? Like, no one agreed that the Russians should invade Ukraine, and that happened. Stop kowtowing to the Russian like power moves. You just like every time you appease them, even Marco Rubio. It's just, I think it's pathetic. But anyway, there you go. That's my opinion. I'll stick to it. I'll stick by it. Right now, we're going to go to Norway. This isn't to do with Ukraine, okay? But this is pretty interesting. And I don't know if you know, in the UK, this should have been huge news for days and days, but all the kind of these protests and then immigration and then blah, blah, blah happening in the UK is kind of taking up the headlines, as Nigel Farage would absolutely want. But actually, this is insanely good news for the UK, right? And this is a huge bunch of money coming to the UK at a time where our economy desperately needs us. So Norway has chosen the United Kingdom as its strategic partner for the acquisition of new frigates, selecting the British-built Type 26 in what Oslo says will be its largest ever defence investment. So this is huge. It's like £10 billion, I think. Is that something like $13.5 billion? £10 billion, at least, and a bunch of ships. And these are ships that have been chosen for hunting subs and for being able to operate in shallow waters. In other words, ideal for around Norway with the fjords and doing what the Norwegians and the British like to do, which is hunt Russian subs, or not like to do, but need to do. And this is really good, but it's bigger than this. So you might go, well, why are you telling us this, JP? Are you just proud of the UK here? No, actually, it fits into a larger problem, I think, for the United States. So just to give you an idea of what's happened here in the Govan shipyard up in the Clyde in Scotland, is that this has secured jobs for like 4,000 people plus and loads of supply chains. Scotland shipyards now hold an order book. So when you add these Type 26s to the existing Type 26s from, who else is getting them? Canada? Is it Canada and Australia? I might be wrong there, but there are a couple of other countries who've got Type 26 on order, and the UK as well. Are building them for the Royal Navy. Now, Scotland shipyards now hold an order book for an expected 18 frigates, 13 Type 26s, UK, Norway, and others, and 5 Type 31s. This is the largest surface warship program in Europe, and it's rivaled only by the US and China. So this is freaking huge, and this should have been much bigger news for the UK than it was allowed to be. Like, this should be, our government should be shouting from the rooftops about this. This is exactly what we need, which is economic stimulation in the UK. Why am I telling you this? It's important because of this, because they were going to go and buy them from the United States. And apparently Trump's threats about kill switches turned the Norwegians off from going to the United States, and they switched to the UK. And this is actually a loss to the US. So David Trump says, I visited Norway this year. Leaders told me they had initially favored a US bid for the frigates. Trump's comments about kill switches alarmed Norwegians, that the US was no longer a trustworthy supplier of equipment to defend Norway against Trump's friends in Russia. Actually, some people are saying it's a better ship as well, but they actually weren't going to go for it originally. But I've seen some other people say that I'm glad they've gone for the Type 26, because it is. Now, the problem the British have is we're like the slowest at building ships. So they're going to have to sort it out up there. They've got a big order book now. Can they expand the dockyards up there? Interesting that the Govan dockyards that are being built, the shipyards that are being built in, I think was saved by a Norwegian company. So I wonder if there's a kickback here where, I don't know if the shipyards are still owned by the Norwegians up in Scotland, but it would make a lot of sense if, we're going to get them built in Scotland. Oh, it turns out it's a Norwegian, that the shipyards are Norwegian up there. I think they were saved in the 80s by the Norwegians or something. Anyway, someone else can let me know that. I'm no expert here. Now, that's important because this is all part of this game of chess that's going on, and the idea that the US is an unreliable ally, and the Norwegians recognizing that and wanting to be a lot closer to European allies and neighbors. You've got the idea as well that Spain pulled the plug on the US military industrial cash cow. $6 billion in F-35 jets has gone, and they're going to send their money to Europe instead. So if you remember earlier this month, Spain dropped F-35 plans to look to European alternatives. So, this is part of this tussle between the United States and Europe over where does European money go, but not just European, Canadian, Australian, because Trump has now pissed off the Australians and the British with AUKUS, with putting doubt on the submarine alliance that we've got between the three countries. You've got, and remember, the Australians said, I don't even remember that, you might not know this at all, but in order to go in with AUKUS, the Australians had to, essentially the French got gazumped. The French are going to build these subs for the Australians. Then at the last minute, they pulled the plug, the Australians, and went into AUKUS from a military strategic as well as an industrial point of view. But it could well be that AUKUS falls apart and they go cap in hand back to the French, or tail between the legs back to the French. But then this idea that Europe is trying to get people in Europe, other European nations, to buy European rather than buy American. But then at the same time, America has these weapons that no one else seems to be able to make, and Ukraine needs these American weapons, and so they have Europe over the desk to some degree in terms of that PURL system of buying this American equipment. I find it amazing that Europeans, that the French and Italians haven't managed to get the SAMP-T air defense system to compete with Patriot nearly enough. I would have thought they would be making sure that Ukraine gets SAMP-T and not Patriots. But although they've got two SAMP-T systems, I think that's clearly not as many as they've got Patriots. Anyway, there you go. It's an interesting thing from Ronnie here from Grunching. I don't want anyone to say again, Europe step up. I mean, they are certainly stepping up. There's no doubt about that. And I had that rant the other day when I think Cathy was saying, this is Europe's problem. It's like, yeah, and actually they are doing it. But she was saying, and it's a valid point, that if Europe just spent 0.25% of their GDP, everyone agreed to, this is kind of like the Lithuanian plan, I think it was. No, the Estonian plan. If everyone spent 0.25% of GDP on supporting Ukraine, Ukraine wouldn't be in problem. Wouldn't be having too much of a problem at all. Right. Okay, let's go on to Russia. So Russian Defense Minister Belousov, and I reported this the other day, but not in a military aid video, said the military has increased recruitment targets to support offensive operations. He added that over 10,000 motorcycles, ATVs and buggies will be purchased to increase the speed of tactical group movement. The idea that they're going with light equipment. Now, is that because it is advantageous to attack with light equipment, or is it because they can't build that other stuff? So he's announcing this as if it's beneficial. It increases the speed of tactical group movement. Are they forced to do that because they can't produce enough infantry fighting vehicles and APCs? I don't know. You can answer that one. Now, the Yelabuga plant. This is a thread from Daniela from Turchny. I might get him back on the channel to talk about this. So no chain is stronger than its weakest link. So new Turchny investigation on Shahed drones and the Yelabuga plant, first in a mini-series. If the Shahed is the arrow and the launch site's the bow, today we cover the blacksmith forging the arrow. One, if you'd like to dive straight into the full investigation, you'll find the link below, so you can go and find that on the Turchny website. This thread covers a summary. So over the past 5 months, Russia's tripled its use of Shahed-type drones, now averaging 103 launches a day. Ukraine hasn't had a single day without attacks. In April 2025, Russia launched 2. It has had, oh, maybe not in the past 5 months. Certainly has had a couple of days without any attacks. But anyway, in April 2025, Russia launched 2,485 Shaheds. By July the 6th, by July, 6,297. That's a 1,378% increase compared to July 2024. So you can see from this graph that there's been an incredibly rapid expansion of their production and the usage of these drones. Interesting kind of areas here where you're wondering, I wonder what happened. Is this where the Ukrainians managed to hit some supply chain and whatnot? Anyway, Yellowbug has expanded quickly. New production halls, dormitories, and workshops, thanks to tax breaks, customs benefits, and state investment. It has turned it into one of Russia's most important industrial clusters. There's a logistics area associated with it called the Yellowbug SEZ Special Economic Zone, which is actually kind of Chinese run. Inside the plant, workers hand layer carbon fiber for Shahed airframes. Carbon fiber comes from Yellowbug Fiber, UMATEX, acquired by Rosatom. They're the nuclear state-run organization, aiming to hit 10,000 tons per year by 2030. Absolutely insane. But here's the paradox. Yellowbug's self-sufficient war industry depends on fragile supply chains. And this is what I think the Ukrainians have hit recently, although I think the Russians have managed to fix it again. I'm just going to do a bit of an aside here. If you get a chance, watch Perun's latest video on the striking of the oil refineries. So Perun, Perun. If you don't watch Perun's videos, what have you been doing? Really interesting look at how successful Ukraine have been with that, what the advantage is for it, how do you do it really well. And then there was a section looking back in history and how the Allies tried to do this to Germany, didn't do a very good job of it in terms of hitting refineries. And then eventually tried a lot harder. But the Germans were amazing at actually fixing the refineries really freaking quickly. And the same goes for Yellowbug and the supply chain. So I've said recently that you had this gap where there were fewer drones sent. You had these massive record-breaking days of 700 drones sent, and then suddenly there was this gap where they were struggling to do that. And then in the last week, they're back up to doing like 600 and 600 again, or near enough. But that gap, I think the Ukrainians hit the supply chain, and that's what I was saying many days. If you watch my hits and losses videos, I was talking about this lots. And I think they hit the supply chain, not necessarily Yellowbug itself, but the component manufacturers and explosive manufacturers and whatnot. But the thing is, you can hit them, and then Russians will be able to fix that up. So that doesn't, take it out forever. And you have to keep hitting them. And that's what the Second World War taught us, is that when they hit refineries, the Germans would fix them really quickly. Then you got to hit them again. Then they fix it. Then you hit them again. But you just got to keep doing it. And it is a Sisyphean task where you're pushing that boulder up the hill repeatedly. But actually, it does help. And with refineries, actually, when they fix them up, they quite often don't fix them back up to the to be able to process the capacity they previously were able to. So you are generally degrading it each time you hit it, and especially in this era of sanctions and difficulty in getting components and expertise. So my larger point, that's a lot of rambling for me to say, basically the Ukrainians need to keep hitting their supply chains. It just needs to be constant, because the Russians will fix those supply chains back up. Anyway, here's a paradox. Yellowbug's self-sufficient war industry depends on fragile supply chains. Carbon fiber production is impossible without an adequate flux of oxygen and nitrogen once supplied by Air Liquide's infrastructure. So there you go. That is that Air Liquide plant, and gives you the coordinates. Disrupting nodes like Yellowbug is not simple, but understanding its ecosystem and the vulnerabilities hidden within it is essential to countering Russia's drone surge, especially when one of the key components of Shaheds is still handmade. So there you go. You got some bits and pieces there about what's going on. So you can go and look at the in-depth look at that. That's just like a brief 6 comment thread, but essentially there is, any kind of process is only as good as its weakest link, and a weak link is the supply chain. And we should expect to see Ukraine continue to strike at Yellowbug's supply chain, the Shahed supply chain. Okay. Right, so a Russian supplier of FPV fiber optic spools of up to 50 kilometers. These are 50-kilometer spools with setup. Or actually, I don't know. Those are 20 kilometers. Some of these are those. That's a 50 there. with setup instructions, including mounting the spool at a 35-degree angle to the FPV frame. The Russians have typically mounted their spools parallel and well to the rear to avoid the propellers cutting the cable in flight. But yeah, 50-kilometer spools there. So the difference there, you can see that 35-degree angle, so that they don't. Well, that looks like that angle would get in the way. That's angled upwards rather than downwards. But this one, you've got it well back away from the propellers. But anyway, 50 kilometers, that is a worry. We had seen a label on a Ukrainian drone that I think had been found by the Russians that had a label of 60 kilometers for a spool, and the Russians were like, whoa. And then some people are saying, well, that might be psyops, it might not be 60 kilometers, but it did look, I don't know if you go to that trouble. I'd hope that the Ukrainians are able to use them to the range of 60 kilometers. That'd be absolutely phenomenal. Right, I showed you this on a Hits and Losses video, but just to show you how closely the Chinese are working with the Russians and helping them, this was the camera from a Gerber drone that was shot down or intercepted by the Ukrainians, and that camera was then taken apart by the Ukrainians, and the memory card was taken out, and on the memory card was this footage from China. It's also been geolocated, so they know exactly where this is from in China. They know where that road is, where this building is. And they know the type of camera it is as well. And this footage is just testing the camera, make sure it works okay, put in a memory card, yeah, it works okay. Then they forgot to wipe the memory card. It gets sent to Russia, gets whacked on a Russian attack drone and sent into Ukraine, and it's actually got Chinese footage on. So, if anyone was in any doubt as to whether the Chinese were supporting the Russians or not, there you go. They most certainly have been. Right, okay, we're going to go on to the geopolitical stuff. So that's the end of the military aid. I hope that was of interest to you. It's in Shenzhen, says Michael Vuchar. This is a problem with the fall of Xi. Michael says, be careful, I used to work there. Yeah, we're going to see what happens with Xi. I mean, some people are saying that he's actually quite vulnerable at the moment. He purged his military recently, which is a sure sign that he might have been expecting to come up against some pushback from the military. Scruffy, good to have you on board, Scruffy. I just watched your video. Oh no, I haven't finished it. I watched half of your video on the latest there, and the Ukrainians pushing back in Myrna, I think. But I watched a bit on the Russian map that's been released that you were talking about. That was, I presume that's the map from, was it Gerasimov that was showing it? The drone memory card is the stuff of a really bad spy movie. Yes, indeed. Okay, now let's move on to geopolitical news. We're going to start with a 39-year-old man injured a police constable and crashed his SUV through the Russian consulate gate in Sydney. The morning of September the 1st, Australian authorities arrested a man. I don't know what that was all about. I presume it's someone that wasn't a huge fan of Russia. So car for Ukraine link. Thank you, Cheryl. She's posted it in the live chat. She's a bit of a legend. Okay, so we go on. According to the grid operator FinGrid, so we're talking about Finland now, Estlink 1 electricity connection between Finland and Estonia has been disconnected from the grid, and that happened at 5:46 a.m. on Monday morning. FinGrid says an investigation into the fault is underway. Well, we already know that there is a ship that has been impounded and the captain arrested and is going through court, I think, at the moment, for damaging 6 different cables. I think these were the cables as well. If that's happened again, yeah, it's definitely something going on there. So I hope that there's not too much issue there for Finland. Yeah, if that's happened again, then there needs to be some really robust response to what is almost certainly the Russians there. The French foreign minister, I was just reading. So this Wizard of Oz is Australian. I was not the man in the SUV, just to be clear. No, I didn't think you were. I thought you'd still be getting over that gargantuan breakfast you had the other day. Okay. The French foreign minister is holding a press conference this morning in Nuuk in Greenland, together with the Greenlandic counterpart Vivienne Motzfeldt. This is actually from the 31st yesterday. Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot reveals that a French consulate general in Greenland will open at the beginning of the year. Wow. So you got the French. So remember what happened here. So you got the Americans, the Trump administration, saying that we're going to take Greenland, we're going to coerce it basically away from Denmark, our NATO allies, and then also we want Canada as the 51st state, and we're going to tariff all our allies, etc., etc. And then you had France standing up with Denmark, and you had on the way to the NATO summit in Canada, to meet Trump, you had Emmanuel Macron visit Greenland, and it was a real show because remember you had JD Vance go to Greenland. It was a real disaster. It was supposed to be his wife originally, and she was going to go to this dog sled race, and then in the end the dog sled race kind of got cancelled. It was all too controversial, and JD Vance took over, and he visited himself, and he gave that horrendous speech at the military base up in northern Greenland, and then the commander of the military base wrote an email that was like, no, that's not what we think type thing. And then I think they got pushed off sideways. And it was all very controversial. And then Emmanuel Macron visited Greenland, and it was very much like, this is the European soil, mate. You to Trump, this was kind of like, no, you piss off, you're not having it. France will help out Denmark and support Greenland. And then Emmanuel Macron went from there to the meeting in, where was it? Wasn't Edmonton, was it Waterloo? Where anyway, for the NATO summit in Canada, and Trump left early, and some people were suspecting he left early because he was really pissed off with Macron for visiting Greenland. And then we've heard recently that that the US have had 3 people closely connected with Trump working on influence operations to try and foment discord in Greenland, which is, remember, this is a NATO ally, and the US is still keen on getting Greenland back. So to have the French foreign minister go there and say, we are going to open a French consulate in Greenland at the beginning of next year, this is using, well, not using Greenland, it is defending Denmark and Greenland, as a French would see it. But there's a real possibility that Greenland becomes this proxy war, like there's a Cold War going on in Greenland. But the Cold War is not between Russia and the US, it's between the US and Europe. That's where we're at the moment. That's honestly where we're at. So this is super important. So many things going on at the moment. Like you got the SCO going on in China, and Trump being ill in the US potentially, probably. Trump just pissing off his allies at every opportunity, but then when they get together, he's all like, "Oh yeah, Ukraine's cool." And then whenever they go, he's like, he forgets within 4 days, and he's like, "Oh yeah, it turns out that Zelensky's just as much to blame as Putin is." You like what? So like the US are just all over the shop. No offense to my American friends out there, but I'm sorry, your government is all over the shop, and you are trying to, well, not you, but the Trump administration is trying desperately to move away from being in any alliance with anyone, really. And you've just got a completely schizophrenic administration. Now, I think Trump is more likely to help Europe than JD Vance. So the problem here is that Trump is deeply, deeply, I think, ignorant, irresponsible, naive, narcissistic, and manipulatable. But what that means is actually Europeans can manipulate him to do the right thing. Not just by Europe, but I think for the US as well. But the problem is that Russia can do that too, and everyone can do that, and the people around him can do that. So what you've got is a Heritage Foundation, JD Vance, and tech oligarchs operating the White House. Trump is like a figurehead that is quite volatile, and sometimes they can really control him, and then sometimes they can't. So sometimes he says things that are pro-Russian, and sometimes he says things that are pro-Ukrainian. And then Melania Trump might say something. So he really is all over the place, and he's unpredictable. and that is a real challenge for everyone. The problem is, if he imagine he gets too ill and 25th Amendment is invoked and JD Vance takes over. JD Vance is ideologically far more knowledgeable. Like, he knows his ideology, and he actually has an ideology. I don't think Trump has an ideology. Vance has an ideology. He's also it's his ideology, part he's a puppet himself, but he's very much a puppet, very directly, of Peter Thiel, of the kind of Palantir Heritage Foundation world. And unfortunately, none of those are big fans of Ukraine. So you lose Trump, and I will criticize Trump every single freaking day about what he does on Ukraine. But I'm wondering whether JD Vance will be wholly worse for Ukraine. When you listen to everything Vance says, Vance has never said a nice thing really about Ukraine. Trump occasionally says nice things because he gets, he has the recency bias where he just says what the last person said to him, just regurgitates that. But JD Vance, I don't think so. So yeah. But here's the thing. This is and Paul Gouda-Deveritz has actually now a really important point here. The thing about JD Vance, though, so Trump has the hold. This is so super. Sorry to go into Trump, but this is really important. This is geopolitics, and to understand this is to understand Ukraine and Russia and America's relationship with Ukraine and Russia. Trump doesn't give a damn what Congress says, and he's invoked this economic emergency and then the Venezuelan emergency. So there is this false sense that the US is having an emergency, and as a result, he can keep writing these executive orders where he can unilaterally make these decisions. So he then says it's an emergency. He then says, I'm going to make all these tariffs by executive order. A court has just said, well, there isn't really an emergency, and therefore all these tariffs don't stack up. I'm sorry, they're illegal. But Trump really doesn't give a shit. So Trump just does all this, and Congress are powerless. They shouldn't be, but they are. And they are powerless because the majority in Congress, so there's still this wafer-thin majority in the House of Representatives and a slightly bigger majority for the Republicans in the Senate. But because all the Republican senators and representatives are so freaking spineless, none of them stand up to Trump. So he can overrule Congress with consummate ease. Now, if that's in... So then if JD Vance takes over, JD Vance does not have the backing of Congress. JD Vance will not be able to sit in the Oval Office and write executive orders willy-nilly. He won't get away from that because he doesn't have the command of the Republican Party in a way that Trump does. Like, say what you like about Trump. Everyone's shit scared of Trump to the point where they don't want to cross him because they get excoriated on social media, and then they get primaried and they'll lose their funding and they'll lose their job, right? So people are scared of Trump, but they're not scared of JD Vance. JD Vance doesn't have the charisma, and therefore they won't see him as having the leadership for not only the United States, but actually for Congress and for the Republicans in Congress. So Paul, that's a really, really good point, is that while JD Vance is ideologically more dangerous, he's maybe far less powerful than Trump. Trump is ideologically vacuous, flip-flopped, he's inconsistent, he's volatile, he's an absolute douchebag in my opinion, and he's super powerful in terms of overriding Congress. And so you've got there's loads of dynamics going on there. Hopefully that's accurate and makes sense to you. It certainly makes sense to me, which is exactly why I said it. Thanks, Paul, for getting involved there. Congress isn't powerless. The Republicans just handed all the power to their emperor with no brains. Yes. I mean, in principle, it's not powerless. I mean, that's what, this is an anathema to the founders, no doubt. You separate the separation of powers with the three, the executive, Congress, and the judiciary, and with the unified executive theory of the Heritage Foundation, or it pre-existed then, but the idea that they are trying to move towards consolidating power in the executive, which is in the White House. So basically, the Heritage Foundation essentially just want a Christian nationalist dictator. Really, that's what's going on. And, yeah, so Heritage Foundation is going to be super excited about JD Vance because he can be that much more than Trump. Trump will give lip service to religiosity, but he's not really religious at all. JD Vance does a better job of doing that, but actually, although he's more their man ideologically, as mentioned, Congress might not go along with it. Anyway, that's enough on that. Let's go back to what we were talking about. So, Greenland. So Hungary is holding its veto on launching EU accession talks with Ukraine. Foreign Minister Peter Shahed said after an informal EU ministerial in Copenhagen, he claimed Ukraine's membership would harm Hungarian farmers and, quote, let the Ukrainian mafia into Hungary, citing food security concerns. Right. This is interesting because Trump has actually had a go at Orban for continually vetoing Ukraine's accession to the EU. And apparently, you know, there was a stern rebuke of Orban recently, even though Orban is, you know, best pals with Trump. So it's interesting that Shahed is still being vetoed for or Hungary still vetoing Ukraine's accession to the EU there. So possibly Trump's words didn't carry as much heft as we might have thought. Now, the EU, speaking about Hungary, is weighing legal ways to bypass unanimity in foreign policy, according to Bloomberg. So, in other words, you know, when you make decisions in the EU, you need a unanimous vote. All member states need to vote. But of course, if you have like a couple of douchebags in there, like Hungary and Slovakia, I don't mean the people, I mean the politicians there, then they can really screw everything up. And that's indeed what's happening. So they're talking about like a supermajority type thing rather than unanimity. Qualified majority actually is a technical term here. So a group of 12 countries backs shifting to qualified majority voting to speed up decisions on Ukraine and Russia, often blocked by Hungary as they are. That really needs to happen because we've been talking about that for 2 years now, and yet nothing has come about. Sorry, reading some of your comments. France and Germany have agreed to begin a strategic dialogue on how France's nuclear arsenal, as I hinted earlier, could contribute to Europe's security, breaking a decades-old taboo. This is as the Europeans move away from American hegemony, maybe American power, American military presence in Europe. It's like, you want us to stand on our own 2 feet. In that case, we don't need you. We don't need your nuclear umbrella. And of course, some in America might say, yeah, brilliant, you need to do that. You need to take that power on yourself. We shouldn't be spending money and doing all this in Europe. This is your problem. But many in America might also then go, no, we do need to be doing that, because if we don't do that, then we have no say in the direction of Europe. And actually what Europe does and our place in Europe, America's place in Europe militarily, actually brings a return on investment. But there aren't, the MAGA Republicans of the world are very much simplistic in their view, very transactional, very like, we're spending this much money, we should not be doing that. Why we need to be spending that money on our people back here, and that's that kind of isolationism. But they don't understand that if the US is like, the reason the US is the most powerful nation in the world is precisely because they've been doing that for the last 70 years. Like, the US has been going, there are 80 US military bases around the world, right? That is an expression of power. If you go, we shouldn't be spending this money, fair enough. I'm not saying that it is prima facie correct that the US should do that. What I'm saying is, you can't on the one hand say USA, we're the best country in the world, we're the most powerful country in the world. I saw a bunch of debates the other day between Destiny, this left-wing YouTuber, and 5 different Trump supporters. And each one of them kept saying, we're just the best country in the world at everything, and we need to be spending our money here. And it was that mentality, just honestly, all but one of them's quite sensible. But all the others were really simplistic. It's like, we're obviously the best country in the world, therefore we should be tariffing the hell out of everyone and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, oh my God, you don't understand how the world works at all. And it's the idea that there's no such thing as a free lunch. Like, the US has been spending that money on USAID and the Voice of America and Radio for Europe and military bases and this and that, and on NATO, or on their own defense, as a percentage of their GDP, so that they can project power. And by projecting power, you get trade deals, and you get relationships that are beneficial to the United States, and you get a return on your investment. To not understand that is to be really simplistic. Again, Perun did a fantastic video on how the US exports security. Did it right at the beginning of the war when people were complaining about NATO expenditure and this and that. And Perun's video on that is an absolute must watch. So what my point being that Americans will say, well, yeah, this is great. You know, you go and look after yourself. You're going to use British and French nuclear weapons. Yeah. And then that is the US stepping back from power in the world. That is the US letting the world get on with it itself while it just goes and sits in a corner. And then like 20 years later, don't understand why, you know, no one's shouting USA, USA, USA anymore and being really proud of them being the top of the ladder, because they won't be the top of the ladder. And then, of course, you're letting in, you know, BRICS and China and et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, there is all of that conversation, which we've had a million times here. Now, Germany, talking of Germany and France, German leaders have just been in Kiev again from the coalition faction. So not just like the CDU, CSU of Friedrich Merz's party, but also the SPD says coalition isn't there. And they've been over there. And I think that's really good news that you've got this like across government support for Ukraine. And you've had Merz saying an awful lot of very impactful things, in my opinion. So we are already in conflict with Russia. It's taken a long time for people to admit this out in public. This needs to be said an awful lot more by an awful lot more Europeans. We are in conflict with Russia. They are at war with us. You might not think we're at war with them, but they're certainly at war with us. And they're attacking us daily with hybrid warfare. Ursula von der Leyen's plane landing in Bulgaria yesterday, having to use maps. You know, cyber attacks, information attacks, assassination attempts. I'm in Papua in Germany. Malls in Poland being burnt down. Deal Defense or Deal Metal in Germany burning down. These are Russian attacks. Russian President Vladimir Putin, says Merz, is destabilizing a big part of our country. Absolutely. He said that to French outlet Le Chaîne Info. He's also said that Russia's war financing must be cut off. Addressing conservatives, Merz just said Russian aggression will not stop, quote, until we ensure together that Russia, at least for economic reasons and perhaps also for military reasons, can no longer continue this war. Absolutely correct. Again, Merz is saying all the right things at the moment, in my opinion. He added, that is why we are working so hard with America to find a way to achieve this together. So still that reliance on the US. We are now pursuing a coherent foreign policy, he said. And then you've got Donald Tusk, the Polish prime minister, although there's going to be this tussle between him and the PIS, the Law and Justice Party, with Nawrocki, the Polish president, being somewhat prickly at the moment. Anyway, Tusk met with Ursula von der Leyen. Von der Leyen came to Poland, and I think there were some pretty significant words said there. No concessions, no subtle games with Russian leader Putin and aggressive Russia will lead to success. They will not guarantee us security. He noted that his country is counting on a very serious participation in the distribution of funds from EU programs that enhance security. Quote, Poland, Europe, NATO, and the United States must again, like before, like 45 years ago, when we felt the support of the entire West, be very firm, resolute, and united against this version of the evil empire. Enough of concessions. We must be firm and well prepared for this. So really strong words from Merz, really strong words from Tusk there. And then we had Ursula von der Leyen saying that this was her at the border. This is like what's going on in the UK with border immigration. This is a problem right across Europe. Everyone's really concerned about immigration, even not for immigration itself, but actually for the perception of immigration and how it plays with the electorate. So everyone's dealing with this. I've got another addendum. I did a whole video on this. Some people don't like what I was saying because, you know, they didn't quite understand that I wasn't neither being pro or anti-immigration. I was just saying having these quite clearly quite racist protests and attacks on people is really, really upsetting to see in the UK from a British point of view. And whatever you think about immigration, that's the wrong way to go about it. and it is just, there's some really unsavory stuff going on in the UK at the moment, and it's being fomented by the Russians, and Nigel Farage is just loving it, lapping it up, and just throwing gasoline on the fire, and it's a real shame. Yeah. Anyway, there's no surprise then that you see Ursula von der Leyen do this. At the border between Poland and Belarus, Poland is facing hybrid attacks from across the border. So there are these theories and claims that the Belarusians are sending migrants across the border into Poland to upset Poland's social cohesion, as they do apparently up in Finland. The Russians are doing in Finland as well. Poland is facing hybrid attacks from across the border. We stand in solidarity with our member state. In our new EU budget, we have proposed to triple border management funding. This is massive. We are all responsible for Europe's external borders. Interesting today in the UK, just to talk about borders, because again, I did that whole video on the UK. Really good stats coming out from the UK in terms of the amount of money being spent on hotels for asylum seekers has gone down. So for those people who are genuinely worried, they should, but it won't touch your sides. But actually, you know, last year was the lowest year for small. This last year was the lowest year for small boats crossings in the UK for some years. Less money being spent on hotels, which was a pledge from the government. They're going to stop like family members of people seeking refugee status coming over as well, and all of this stuff that's a much more robust approach to immigration. But the people who are protesting, they're not going to, they won't vote for this government again, or not that they did. They would have voted reform anyway. So I don't think you're ever going to appease some of those people. But what you're going to see is that most governments in Europe are going to be pretty harsh on immigration going forward, because they can't afford not to be, in terms of how easy it is to whip up sentiment, whether it be from Russians abroad and Chinese and North Korean and Iranian bots and trolls, or whether it be just from within our own countries, from people who are very much into grievance narratives and division rather than unity. So anyway, Ursula von der Leyen pledges tripled EU border funding during that visit, and they Tusk claimed Belarusian border personnel monitored the press conference with European Commission President during their visit to the contested frontier there. And this idea that von der Leyen, when she went from Poland to Bulgaria, there was electronic warfare or jamming interference of the GPS of the plane, and they had to land using maps. And so some people are genuinely saying Russia tried to kill our president, Ursula von der Leyen, the EU president. This is an act of war. Yeah, and I would broadly agree. I would actually agree with that. Okay, so then going back to Poland, we have this situation where Nawrocki is the president and moving further to the right and thinking about going to coalition, getting the PIS to go into coalition with the Confederation. The Confederation are pro-Russian. PIS are broadly pro-Ukrainian, but they are right-wing populists, and therefore they are quite easy to manipulate on other things, as I think we saw during the farmers' disputes and the border disputes with Poland and Ukraine. So there are issues there. And Nawrocki has now apparently turned around and said, during the events marking the 86th anniversary of the outbreak of World War II, that he wants reparations for Poland from Germany. Now, when you want European unity in the light of supporting Ukraine, this is just... So Nawrocki, as a former amateur boxer and historian, is someone who doesn't like communist Russia and doesn't like fascist Germany or Nazi Germany, although, you know, they are dabbling with some fairly right-wing nationalism there. But yeah, so you know, has issues with the Soviet Union from years ago and from Germany from years ago. So both sides of the border, really, or going east and going west, he's picking fights, and he's picking fights with Germany and asking for reparations. Yeah, I don't know how that's gonna end. Okay, so now let's go on to the US and the SCO in China at the moment. So the US has urged Russia to move toward peace with Ukraine or face new sanctions. Yeah, how many times have we heard this? But then absolutely has to be 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 week. Nothing seems to have happened, and now Trump's gone AWOL. The warning came during an emergency UN Security Council meeting due to Russia's missile attack. US envoy Kelly stated the was that Keith Kelly or Kelly? No, Kelly stated the attack cast doubt on Russia's seriousness about peace. So John Kelly, the US's missions minister counselor, said the airstrikes cast doubt on the seriousness of Russia's desire for peace. So you've got people within the American administration and delegations saying, as they obviously should, that the Russians aren't interested in peace. You've got Trump having said, right, 10 to 12 days, and that came to an end. Then more talks, and then it was like 2 weeks. That 2 weeks ended, what was it, yesterday? And nothing. Now you've got Scott Bessent. Now this is interesting. So some people say the two most serious people in the administration who actually are trying not to be complete wingnuts are Marco Rubio and Scott Bessent. But the problem is they can't not be wingnuts, because if they are too sensible, they'll just get kicked out, right? So they're trying to tread this fine line between saying yes to all the mental things that Trump is asking them to do, and people like Howard Lutnick and Peter Navarro and Stephen Miller, whilst also understanding really what they should be doing. So sometimes you look into Marco Rubio's eyes and you think, right, you've died inside. And sometimes you look into Scott Bessent's eyes when he's whirled onto TV and you know that he doesn't believe what he's saying. But anyway, Bessent has told Fox News that the US is considering all possible sanctions against Russia. This is what we want to hear, but considering it should be done. Considering should have been the last 6 months. You've had 7 months now to freaking consider, right? Considering's done. Putin hasn't played ball. So put the bloody sanctions on. But anyway, we're considering sanctions against Russia. He noted that after the meeting between Putin and Trump and the subsequent phone call, as well as a visit of European leaders and Zelensky, Putin, contrary to expectations, stepped up the bombing. Now, this is good for Bessent to say that, and that's obvious, right? We know this, that Putin doesn't care, stepped up the bombing, whatever. But for one of the main people in the Trump administration to admit on Fox News that Putin stepped up the bombing instead of looking like he was serious for peace is a move in the right direction. It is too little, it is too late, but it's there. And then he called Putin's actions despicable, right? So he said that sanctions could be about to happen. It really depends what's going on in the White House, I think, vis-a-vis Trump. But this is the kind of thing at least we want to hear. Right, John Hardy here saying, so the scoop from the White House. So the White House, there was a scoop a couple of days ago that they believe, the White House believes Europe is secretly undoing Ukraine's war's end. So there was this claim that the White House was saying that, yeah, we want peace to happen, and we're trying to do peace with Trump and Putin and Zelensky, but Europe keeps saying in public that they're supporting this, but actually behind the scenes they are trying to help Ukraine too much to prolong the war further and further. So there's this claim from the White House that this is going on, supposedly. John Hardy says this is absurd. Putin refuses to meet with Zelensky, but Europe gets blamed for backing Kiev's refusal to cede additional territory. The US won't impose tougher sanctions, but Europe gets pressured to do so, even though US sanctions would be far more effective than European ones. So the Americans have also been pressuring Europe to put secondary sanctions on India, blah, blah, blah. Europe just put their 19th, or they're looking at putting their 19th package of sanctions onto Russia. So the US really is behind on sanctions in that respect. Quote, White House officials are losing patience with European leaders whom they claim are pushing Ukraine to hold out for unrealistic territorial concessions by Russia. Axios has learned that the sanctions the US is urging Europe to adopt against Russia include a complete cessation of all oil and gas purchases, plus secondary tariffs from EU on India and China, similar to those that already imposed on India by the US. Thing about that, the US would need to have a go at, I wonder who's still buying hydrocarbons from Russia? You know, the US is urging Europe to adopt to have a complete cessation of hydrocarbons imports. Go and have a word to your best mate, Viktor Orban. Go and have a word to Robert Fico of Slovakia. They are the ones that are buying from Russia still. I think you, Donald Trump, could exert an awful lot of pressure on Hungary. Viktor Orban's your man. You have a word with him. Now, John Bolton has come out and talked a lot about the war in Ukraine to Sky News just recently. Timothy Milovanov, because it's difficult to play these, so I'll read his summaries. Chances for peace, says John Bolton, in Ukraine are worse than before the Alaska summit. That's your big takeaway. That John Bolton, not everyone likes him, but he is a bit of a war hawk, but he's actually pretty much right on Ukraine. Everything he said on Ukraine has broadly been fairly spot on, certainly with regard to his analysis of Trump on Ukraine. And he's right. Like they're bombing more than they were before Alaska. Like what we're not just back to square one, we're back to square zero. So chances for peace in Ukraine are worse than before Alaska. Putin ignores Trump, escalates attacks on civilians, makes no concessions. At the SCO, he blamed NATO. So just in Changing, in China, at the SCO, Putin has said NATO's coup in Ukraine, and we can't have peace negotiations until we have all our root causes sorted out, demilitarization of Ukraine and denazification. So we need to have reduce the Ukrainian army and get rid of Zelensky. Then we can have negotiations. So Putin has just gone back to maximalist demands. So for Scott Bessant to say we're considering sanctions, it's like, bloody hell. Anyway, at the SEO, he blamed NATO, using it to justify invasion and seek to restructure NATO while aiming for control of Ukraine. 3.5 years ago, we should have built a NATO strategy to achieve a goal of full restoration of Ukraine's sovereignty and in territorial integrity. Biden failed to do this. The only acceptable outcome, or Russia and others will see that you can get away with aggression. Security guarantees mean little. Putin has a long-range strategy to take control of Ukraine. Part of his goal to recreate the Russian Empire, despite huge costs, he has only doubled control since 2014. Any pause is just to rebuild and prepare for a third offensive. Much effort was made to make India more open to cooperation with Australia, Japan, USA. Trump has upended that, sending India back towards Russia and closer to China, shredding decades of work. It can be fixed, but it will take much effort and not start soon. So all of that I agree with 100%. The frustration that he feels there. Now, Anton Gerashenko says there's a saying, a tank won't move without fuel. That is what it's like with Putin. He will not stop on his own. He's not concerned with problems in the Russian economy or the number of Russian soldiers killed in meat assaults. So a bit of a thread here from Gerashenko. This psychopath's motives are political. He wants to restore the empire, bring Russia back to the status of a global geopolitical center, and Ukraine is an essential part of this plan. He was willing to destroy Russia for this plan to completely take over Ukraine. Therefore, he will only stop when he literally runs out of resources to continue the war. Putin is waging a war of attrition against Ukraine. The very act of conducting this war is exhausting Russia. Accordingly, he must also wage a war of attrition against Russia. I think everyone is now certain that diplomatic negotiations will have no effect on Putin. Nothing changed after Alaska. Putin continues terrorism and the mass killing of Ukrainians. Ukraine's direct sanctions against Russian oil refineries are working. Ukraine's strikes on the Russian refining complex are reducing Putin's military resources. What is happening now with the Russian oil sector? So this is the Russian oil sector. Russian oil fields are mostly at a mature stage of development and cannot be started and stopped on a whim, which is a problem for Russia. The technical storage capacity of Transneft pipelines is also low. Simultaneous failure of oil refineries and pipelines and ports will put a serious strain on the system. The Far East is extremely unbalanced in terms of gasoline supply, with petroleum products even coming from Omsk, straining the Komsomolsk and Khabarovsk refineries destabilizes the entire Far East. 40 million tons of crude oil per year are transported via pipelines to China. Any damage to pumping stations means huge problems for oil fields in Russia and refineries in China. An effective method of combating the shadow fleet transporting Russian oil is to include the vessel on the SDN list. Personal sanctions against specific individuals are more effective than general ones. Interesting. And so that's his synopsis there. So what do the Russians say? This is Putin's aide, Ushakov. Now everyone is talking about a trilateral meeting. So then we've heard that supposedly this meeting's back on between Putin, Zelensky, and Trump. But Ushakov says everyone's talking about this trilateral meeting, about a meeting between Putin and Zelensky, but as far as I know, there was no agreement between Putin and Trump specifically on this. It's a bit of a denial there from the Russians. Now, leaders of 26 states are expected to attend the 2025 China Victory Day parade in Beijing. That will take place on September the 3rd, so that's 2 days' time. You're going to have Robert Fico there from Slovakia, which is, I think, pretty embarrassing. But you've got your typicals, your Kim Jong-uns, your Lukashenko of Belarus, the Iranian leader, and, of course, Putin. The meeting and the festivities will signify that China is using the memory of World War II as an instrument of diplomacy and foreign policy. Beijing is forming its own narrative alliance, and it presents as part of the community of common destiny concept that includes the development and building of a harmonious world according to the Chinese model, says Anton Gerashenko. What is behind these terms? What are the values of the promotion of which Xi Jinping sees as the main goal of his foreign policy? Tomorrow, the negotiations between Xi Jinping and Putin will start. Putin, this was yesterday, so this is happening today. Putin is trying to emphasize his worth, and the meeting at Alaska has added him some weight. He needs to deal with the United States to present Russia as a superpower and to enhance the position in negotiations with China. However, in reality, Russia is becoming increasingly dependent on China. It's like a vassal state, isn't it? Starting with technology. China has already made statements that it is not interested in Russia losing, but China is also not interested in Russia becoming stronger. China, as well as Russia and the United States, is interested in European markets. Therefore, complicated negotiations and no quick fixes are ahead. Unfortunately, this also means the war will continue. So China's got an interesting role here because it doesn't want to annoy America and Europe too much because we buy an awful lot of Chinese stuff. So it doesn't want to bite off its nose to spite its face. So just completely jumping in bed with Russia is obviously going to be dangerous for China. So there's an interesting game of 4D chess with quite a lot of players. So it's not really chess. Right, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico has announced plans to meet with Zelensky on the 5th of September after coming back from the SCO. Prior to that, he will travel to Beijing to meet Xi Jinping and Putin and other global leaders for the 80th anniversary of World War II's end. But yeah, going to meet Zelensky. It'd be interesting to be a fly on the wall there. Now, going to India, Narendra Modi was apparently offended by Trump's request that he nominate Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. Some are now, as I've said a number of times, some are now supposing that Trump's tariffs on India, because he hasn't tariffed Russia and China or anyone else about Russian hydrocarbons at all. It's only India. Why is he picked on India? So that is weird. That does need explaining. And the best explanation is that actually he was genuinely pissed off that Modi got angry when he asked to be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And Trump, it does hold a grudge, and he is retributive, at least in the short term. And he will say, right, we're gonna put tariffs on India, and we're going to use the excuse of Russia, but really it's because I'm really annoyed that you were angry that I suggested nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize. But then you have the US trying to maybe even look to go back to India with the tail between their legs. This is what Phillips O'Brien here says, the historian of war, saying the USA has screwed up so badly by decimating the US relationship with India because of Trump's childish, destructive ego that the State Department is now in the process of groveling. In the end, the US will probably cave, as it has with China. So the US embassy in India is now, rather than going all hard on tariffs, is saying the partnership between the United States and India continues to reach new heights, a defining relationship of the 21st century. That this month we're spotlighting the people, progress, and possibilities driving us forward. From innovation and entrepreneurship to defense and bilateral ties, it's the enduring friendship between our two peoples that fuels this journey. Follow the hashtag to be part of hashtag US India FWD forward for our people. That's a very long hashtag. Yeah, I don't buy that. And also, you know, Trump's been saying stuff on Truth Social. Well, whoever is pretending to be Trump is saying something on Truth Social. It's all just a hot mess. I think the whole foreign policy of the United States is insane at the moment. Right. This is really unfortunate. So this is Alex Rafoglu saying, who's a reporter, saying sources tell me that Senator Mullen, that must be Mark Wayne Mullen, who is an absolute is actively killing the inclusion of Megrabari Act in the NDAA. What that means is that's the NDAA is the National Defense Authorization Act, which is the budget for the armed forces for the year, and doesn't include the approach of the Megrabari Act to Georgia. So this is trying to go hard on Georgia in terms of Georgian Dream Party and Russian influence there. And actually, there is bipartisan support in Congress for the Megrabari Act that does this. As you can see from this picture, it literally says bipartisan support for a stronger democracy. So Georgia and the US, that's a Megrabari Act, but it's going to be, looks like it's going to be vetoed or killed by Mark Wayne Mullen, who this is a backdoor move to protect anti-American Georgian Dream regime and abandon the Georgian people. It's like these people are trying to help Russia. It's literally like, what would you expect if you had people in the American administration who were actual agents of the Kremlin? And that's literally what you'd expect. Why would an Oklahoma senator bury a vital bill to please Russian Dream? Megrabari Act is a vital tool for holding the Georgian Dream regime accountable for its democratic backsliding and its adoption of Russian-style laws. The bill passed the House early this year, and it's backed by 98 senators. 98. Only 2 remain reluctant, and Mullen has been one of them. Obstructing the Megrabari Act to support anti-American IRGC sympathizer, China-backed Russian Dream regime sends a chilling message to everyone that cares about the South Caucasus. There is no room for ambiguity when it comes to supporting European aspirations of the Georgian people. Bonus, Senator Mullen was among 4 lawmakers who sent a letter to Secretary Pompeo in 2020 regarding Georgian Dream and Ivanishvili's ties to American hostile rivals and enemies. My only question is, what happened to him? Why suddenly favor anti-American Russian Dream over the aspirations of the Georgian people? So here's a guy in 2020 that wrote to the Secretary of Pompeo he wasn't Secretary of State, was he Secretary of Defense? Anyway, it's Mike Pompeo, Secretary, wrote a letter to him saying, you know, I'm really worried about Georgian Dream and this billionaire Ivanishvili. And then, like 5 years later, he's obstructing the very thing he was asking for. What happened? And this is where you start thinking, well, there's some corruption going on here. There's agency there, overt agency. Really worrying. Right, just a few more things, and then we'll get to your lovely comments. Easy answer. They are assets. Yeah, and that's kind of thing, isn't it? Money. It sounds. You just think, no, surely that's just the stuff of films, but no, it really is. Just that's probably what's going on. Yeah. So this is particularly worrying. The US State Department has denied visas to Palestinian officials for the September UN General Assembly, according to Axios. Now, say what you like about Palestine, right? You can be pro-Palestine or anti-Palestine, but stopping people from that, well, this is where it gets difficult, from that nation, because, of course, not everyone agrees that Palestine is a nation, but from Palestine, from coming to the United States, means that it's just completely unfair. So this unprecedented action actually violates the US-UN agreement, which requires the US to grant visas to UNGA delegates, so General Assembly delegations. So they are a UNGA delegation, right? So you can't deny them visas, but apparently you have done. The decision comes amid Western countries' plans to recognize a Palestinian state at the Assembly. So the US is trying to not let them get recognized by other nations. But like, that's not up to you. That's other nations. You know, it's the United Nations. You aren't just the United Nations here. So this is just, yeah, fairly typical, to be quite honest. Now, talking about what Trump is up to, one of the weirdest things I think I have yet seen Trump say, honestly, one of the weirdest things I've seen him say is this. And I'm kind of thinking this probably was him. This isn't one of his interns. But this is what he's just recently said. And he puts a video alongside it, by the way. This is on True Social. And remember, he's just paved over the Rose Garden and turned it into a tacky patio and put these umbrellas on there that are the same as Mar-a-Lago. He's now like rebuilding stuff out the front. I think is this for the ballroom or is this for the UFC fight that they're going to hold at the White House? I don't know, whatever. But he said this. And now, honestly, if you're a big fan of Trump, ask yourself, yeah, he's my guy. Is he my guy? Does this make him my guy? Is this? Imagine if Biden had written this, right? If Biden had written this, would you be like going nuts? Because I would have thought, as a Trump supporter, you'd be going nuts at Biden for sounding like a mentalist. I used at the White House the most beautiful marble and stone available anywhere. Surfaces are very important to me as a builder. As everyone knows, I've built many great buildings and other things over the years. At the White House, I am very proud of the beautiful stonework we did in the Rose Garden, in this case using limestone plus. The Rose Garden is completed and far more beautiful than anyone ever had in mind when it was conceived of decades ago. 3 days ago, while admiring the stonework, I happened to notice a huge gash in the limestone that extended more than 25 yards long. It was deep and nasty. I started yelling, "Who did this? And I want to find out now." And I didn't say this in a nice manner. I wondered, was it vandalism or was it stupidity? Lo and behold, because of the fact that we've installed the finest security equipment anywhere, they brought back the stupid people with their boss watching in sunglasses. It was a subcontractor that was installing heavy landscaping on a steel cart that was broken and tilting badly, with it rubbing hard against a soft, beautiful stone. I love and respect great workers and contractors, but something like this should never happen. Now, I'll replace the stone, charge the contractor, and never let the contractor work in the White House again. But how great is the video equipment? We caught them cold. Make America great again. Now, what's the actual fiddlesticks? Like, part of this reads like someone writing a story. Part of this reads like someone who's clearly nuts and is shouting at the freaking sky, chasing pigeons. And part of this reads clearly like Trump not wanting to pay contractors like he did for his entire New York real estate. Now, please tell me that this is actually AI generated and is fake and it's a parody, because that is absolute insanity. I swear, if there's a Trump supporter out there that read Biden saying something like that, they would have said he's lost his freaking talk about marbles. He's lost his marbles. Honestly, that is insane. Right, last thing is just a warning, right? So here we have some influencer, some pro GOP person saying of supposedly Mike Walls, the former VP pick for Kamala Harris. So he's going to be vice president if Kamala Harris had won the election. My God, this POS, piece of S, is a governor who was picked to be VP. What the F? Now, if I watch something like this, I know straight away that this person would never do this. So this is clearly AI. So either this person is insanely ignorant, or, and I'm not going to play you the sound on this, either this person is insanely ignorant, or he's willfully spreading disinformation. Because Mike Walls is never doing this. This is obviously AI. Now, what I want to say more broadly is, guys, just be careful, because this is happening so much. As in, when I say this, I don't mean people mistaking, although I do mean that as well. I mean just the proliferation of AI videos and AI images. We are going to have a very big problem, as has been predicted by many, a very big problem of trying to work out what is genuine and what isn't in terms of video and 2D imagery. News agencies are going to be, trying their hardest to kind of fact check this stuff, because it would be so easy to bring out a news piece. As I've said on my videos previously, I've said, oh, look at this video of a flag being raised on the, what was it, the Statue of Liberty or something like that. Someone's like, no, that's AI. And I said, oh, of course it's AI. Like, we can all easily fall for it. Some are more obviously AI than others. It's a warning to us all. And if I make that mistake, as you will, and as you always do, correct me. And hopefully I will remember to do a correction in my next in my video thereafter. Right. Okay, so just a few comments for you guys that I'm going to go through. Some very generous super chats and whatnot. Putin Puppet here says, excellent news. Trump's non-woke fast food diet is not very different from his voters. It opens windows of opportunity. Interesting is that bad fast food reduces one's IQ rather fast. Sounds familiar. Yes, so some people are saying he's already, as Andrew Perpetua said on the JetBro live stream the other night, he's already beyond, or JetBro said it, I think, he's beyond the average life expectancy for an American male. And not to say he's on borrowed time, but I'm sure his diet and lack of exercise other than golf isn't particularly helping. Although he does do golf, hats off to him. It's more exercise than I do. Johnny Nevergard, thank you for your Norwegian love there. Hello team for pink paint. Slava Ukraini. Yes. So something I want to mention is that we've heard this talk about FP1 drones, FP5 cruise missiles, long Neptune missiles, Lüti drones, Germany funding distance munitions. And I just wanted to remind you that Zelensky said, wait for the autumn. He said something like that, didn't he, earlier in the year? He said, wait for the autumn. That's when it's all going to start happening. And I just get a feeling that every night now, the Ukrainians are going to be hammering the crap out of Russia. There are some more things that I've already picked up for tomorrow's video of, command nodes and troop accumulations being struck. Like the Russians are losing people and equipment and refineries and infrastructure and railway infrastructure. They are losing an awful lot every single night. And the Ukrainians are suffering with the masses of Shahed drones and missiles that the Russians send. But I think the Ukrainians are getting more bang for their buck in terms of hitting the Russians and using their own munitions. And I think autumn is going to be a very interesting time. And I'm quite hopeful that Ukraine can really make a difference going forward. Aussie T, g'day JP, g'day team. Back to the start for me. All right, Aussie, thanks, mate. So thank you for this. Otrakselg. S-Link 1 issues are on the land on the Finnish side in Espoo. Converter problems, so it has nothing to do with the cable itself. It will most likely be down for more than 3 weeks. Thank you for alerting me to that. And okay, so that will have nothing to do with Russia. So I stand corrected there. That is not a cable issue, but an issue with the whole system and a converter on the Finnish side. So thank you for that piece of information. Right. Ignis, Lord of Flames, says, do you think, and thank you for this, do you think there's any chance Putin poisoned Trump? The Alaska summit was recent. I know Trump's old, but the timing of it is intriguing. No, absolutely not. So his hands bruising predated that. The thick ankles was predating that. His, I think it's all connected to the CVI. So the cardiovascular, the drugs he was on. I think the CVI was something, what's it? Cardiovascular venous whatever it is. What they eventually had to admit he has, I'm pretty sure they just picked the most common, least worrying thing to cover up something that's probably a bit more serious, whether it is mini strokes or whatever. I think that 100% predates Alaska, and I wouldn't say there was any of that kind of poisoning or anything going on like that. Because like if they did do something like that, that would just start a massive war. Honestly, that would be insane. For Putin can manipulate Trump. My theory would be Putin wants Trump to remain there. Trump dies, you get JD Vance. Well, I think Putin can manipulate Trump more easily than he can JD Vance. It might be that JD Vance is just more naturally inclined towards isolationism and not helping Ukraine. He's anti-Ukraine. But I don't know that Putin can manipulate JD Vance, but he might not need to. But thanks for that. Alpha Chad Game says, have you considered JD Vance might clean house? He owes nothing to Russia and nothing to the Heritage Foundation. Those are both Trump issues. Peter Thiel owns either. So no, because I think I think he's part of both houses, if you like. So Peter Thiel and his tech authoritarianism is an ideology that I think JD Vance is signed up to, but Heritage Foundation is running the White House. Everyone in every position of note in the White House is a Heritage Foundation person. Russell Vought, apart from Marco Rubio and maybe Scott Bessent and Howard Lutnick, yeah, those are kind of like wing up people. But all the people underneath, and even people like Stephen Miller are associated, Tom Hooman, they're all associated with the Heritage Foundation. They are doing the Heritage Foundation playbook. So I think that's a really interesting question. But no, I think personally, I think Peter Thiel's ideology would can sit alongside the Heritage Foundation. He can use Heritage Foundation to deliver that, because the Heritage Foundation are pretty anti-democratic. They want Christian nationalism. They want a theocracy. They want a. So I don't think Peter Thiel's religious, but I think he can use that that move towards unifying the executive, because if you are going to consolidate power in one person, and that person is JD Vance, which is what the Heritage Foundation wants to do, so that they can get JD Vance or whoever it is to deliver this sense of Christian nationalism, conservative, uber conservative stuff, then he can also deliver his stuff through JD Vance. So I think they can operate simultaneously alongside each other. Great question, though. Really great question. Thank you. And Tom, thank you for gifting 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Really appreciate that. Thank you to all of you who have been so generous. I've been speaking for way too long. It is now almost 2 hours. Paul Gilbert, my dad suffered from TIAs for years. My granny did. And it's quite sad she lost all knowledge of who we were and whatnot. It's one of those things, it gets quite philosophical. So when you lose your ability to when you lose your basically your characteristics and your personality, and then you stop remembering who people are, and then you stop having your memories, then you are just, in a sense, a kind of a shadow of who you were. There's very little connection other than genetically to who you were, other than our memory of our granny, right? Or my mum's mum. We remember who you were, but you're not that person anymore. And then you start having really uncomfortable, with my philosophical background, I go straight to like, well, what's the point of keeping this person alive? It sounds horrible, but it is, yeah. You're keeping them, you turn them in the bed. From my granny, she was just alive in a bed getting turned. You're like, well, and my grandma, actually, both females, both grandparents, the same situation, and like you're being turned in a bed daily, but there's no existence here that's fulfilling for you and for anyone who knows you. Right? This is challenging for everyone. So then you start thinking about assisted dying and stuff like that. And it's interesting that the UK has just brought in legislation for assisted dying. I think that's really positive. I think that's a sensible move forward. Yes. Anyway, so lots of people talking about that now. Gone a bit left field here. TIAs are common. My dad had AFib and atrial fibrillation and TIAs. They affected his short-term memory. I mean, my short-term memory is affected by my MS, and I'm always at the back of my mind is if I start losing my marbles, you start losing who you are, and you're thinking, where do you go with that? Luckily with my MS, I've got progressive MS, so it should go worse and worse. But just to remind people, I had stem cell therapy, which I took in Russia. And I took that in 2019 because it's the best place in the world for it. They've been doing it for MS for 20 years. Really amazing team, really amazing hospital. Did all my research, researched it to the hilt. Video blogged a whole lot. I've got another channel called JP's. I haven't posted on there for like years, but it's JP's Life with MS or something like that. And I video blogged my entire experience of every day, everything that happened, all the science behind it and everything in Russia. And it's quite ironic now that I wouldn't be allowed back in Russia. But anyway, that stem cell therapy plateaued my degradation, although my walking is definitely getting worse at the moment. But luckily, my mind, I'm still clinging on to. I'm probably operating about 85% of how my mind used to operate. So I used to be able to multitask a lot better and be able to hold on to lots of things simultaneously. I remember when I'd do like debates and whatnot, I'd be able to my brain would fire around and be able to do lots of things all at once. And now I have to be much more prepared. Like if I was to, I can't remember half of what I've written previously now, most of what I've written. My memory isn't great, so I need a lot of prompts, and I'm fine with prompts, and that's why I do everything through using the browsers, and I can just go and let the brain do the rest. And I'm lucky that my brain is still functioning somewhat okay, given I've got progressive multiple sclerosis. So that's pretty cool. So anyway, thank you very much for everyone. And so that's just age, isn't it? So they say multiple sclerosis is like getting old really quick. So the symptoms are you lose your balance, bladder control and stuff like that, because I'm sure you want to know that. Short-term memory, you can get angry and irascible more easily. And so I'm talking to my dad quite a lot about dementia, or talking to my mum, not so much to my dad, because my dad's dementia is getting worse and worse. And I'm saying to my mum, look, most of the symptoms are symptoms I have, so I can really, I understand what you're going through, and I kind of feel some of these to obviously to a lesser degree than my dad. Anyway, it is like getting old very quickly, unfortunately. So there you go. So yeah, I'm sorry, just reading some of your comments here. Brilliant. Thank you very much for all of your support, by the way. I definitely need to go, and it's midnight here. I need to go, and should I make myself a cup of tea just before bed? I mean, that's dangerous, isn't it? But I definitely need to soothe those vocal cords that have been hammered for a couple of hours. Yeah, I mean, this is the whole point, crunching TIAs make you a different person. Yeah, you aren't the person that you once were. So please remember to go to the link below in the description, carforukraine.com/campaigns, blah, 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 all the rest. It's linked below, and then help out with that campaign. It's really important. We're hoping to drive them out at some point. Things have gone a bit south with regard to that organization due to a number of us having things that have popped up that means that actually we can't do it in the time frame we were hoping to do it. It's all gone a bit south for a bunch of us, a bunch of the team who are going to be driving out. So it will happen though at some point. Thank you very much to the mods. Thank you to all the people who supported the channel. Thank you to Paul Spiker, who was very generous on buying me a coffee the other day, and to all those who support me in all the different ways, PayPal and buy me a coffee. You're all actually wonderful. Thank you. Keeps the lights on. Slava Ukraini, and let's hope that, as I say, every night we see good news for Ukraine, and that they have developed their weapons and that they've sorted out their scaled production of things like cruise missiles and drones, because it sounds horrible because it's war and destruction and often ends in environmental disaster. But when I see Russian refineries blow up, I mean, it's horrific. I shouldn't be, but there's something about me inside me is like, yeah, screw you, Russia. You brought this on yourself, and so yeah, that to me is going to bring about the end to the war the quickest. So it's about the economic collapse of Russia, and so Ukraine needs to be able to strike deep into Russia and do it as much as they possibly can. Long goodbye. It's been a long goodbye. Take care, everybody. Speak soon. To the pips.